Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today it is yet another reaction video to a commie, although thankfully for once it is not Politics Joe. It is someone who is actually much bigger than Politics Joe, but well, I'll be honest, I never heard of him before last week. He goes by the channel Second Thought, has 1.73 million subscribers, tends to get a few 100,000 viewers per video, and so this is actually one that's finally worth me actually going through. And today's video he's called Yeah, Capitalism is Bad, but What Can We Do? This is obviously riffing off the old comic panel of the peasant carrying some bundles of sticks saying we should improve society somewhat, and then there's me in a well saying yet you participate in society, as if any communist has ever even put together a bundle of sticks and had to carry them anywhere, apart from maybe when they're camping with their dad that they hate. And given that I was made aware of Second Thought via this EFAP clip...
This is not a deliberate meme, by the way, but I imagine it wouldn't be a fucking surprise if Man-Carrying Thing made a parody of this.
Different result? Break the machine that powers these societal evils. If capitalism is allowed to survive, we will not. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that this episode was made possible by Henson Shaving.
Oh no, you're gonna blow up the world!
I was kind of interested in what his actual take would be when I found this video of, well, how does he square the circle of capitalism will destroy everything, but he clearly partakes in it. So I guess with that, let's take it away.
Hey everyone. Before we get to the video, I just wanted to take a second to give a huge thank you to all our new patrons.
I mean, already I was going to take the starting advert out and I realised, oh wait, no, this is a massive part of the video, because it's, like, yeah, capitalism absolutely sucks, but what do we do? Apparently what we do is put up our services for sale. I have a deal with all of you. If enough of you all give me money, then I can keep making videos, and that's great. And as usual with these leftists who hate capitalists, the minimum that you can actually give is £2 a month, which is great, but then as you can see there are 10,616 members. Now there is absolutely no way that everyone is paying the £2 a month, but let's say that they are. He's making £21,232 a month. Like, that's absurd. Over the course of a year, he's making over £250,000, and that's pounds, by the way. In dollars, this would be way more, probably close to 300,000. And again, that's still a lowball. This guy is comfortably in the top 1% of earners, certainly worldwide, and in America, also probably true. And he is the man that is effectively grifting everyone into giving him money by saying, isn't the system where I become one of the richest men in America evil? Even if he has to pay staff and editors and scriptwriters and things like that, this is still an absurd amount of money to make for what comes down to a YouTube channel and a podcast.
2 weeks ago, I made an announcement that the business is struggling.
What the hell are you spending money on? Is this a I'm buying too many candles situation? This can't cost that much. Look, all I need to do to make a set like yours is to put some effort into the wall behind me and then buy a camera and buy some decent lights. That's all I need to do. Bear in mind, I do this part-time and I make 3 videos a day. And as far as editing goes, as you will see, his videos aren't that impressive. It's not like he needs to make a graphic designer. I've seen people with better editing using nothing but Fiverr artists to make all their assets. Like, this is crazy. How are you struggling?
And the response has been overwhelming. Not just the signups, but also just the kind words and outpouring of support here, on my personal channel, and in the Discord.
Yep, all these people have been grifted out of money, and I don't think they even realise. I do not believe that the business of a YouTube channel that puts out 1 video a week is struggling. I don't even believe that this guy actually has any staff. Like, his editing skills don't take that much skill, is all I'm going to say, but you'll see what I mean by that. Anyway.
One more surge like that, and we can stop looking for sponsors entirely and make Second Thought a 100% grassroots funded operation.
Hang on, so the business is struggling, and then apparently a lot of these Patreons were a surge recently. It doesn't exactly say how many, but one more surge like that, let's say, and he doesn't even need to take sponsorships anymore. Again, this doesn't sound like a struggling business to me. This sounds like a perfectly booming one. I'm just saying, to everyone that gave money to Second Thought thinking that they'd never have sponsors again, yeah, he's lying to you. This man is effectively a snake oil salesman, and you are just drinking up that snake oil. He could do this for free if he wanted to. I know better than a lot of people. Doing the YouTube videos he does doesn't take staff members and doesn't take editors. He could do this himself part-time, and it's probably what he is actually doing. Anyway, you get the idea of this thanking everyone for giving me your money bit, so let's just get into it now.
Well, I was gonna make this a big fancy video like always, but Hakeem beat me to this particular topic, and he did a great job, so go and watch his video if you haven't already.
No, but I'm sure he's in the same position as you, as one of the top % of earners in America, and then says, let's tear down the system, while not actually doing anything about it, despite having the resources to.
I still do want to take a few minutes to answer this question that I get asked a lot. And by a lot, I mean this is probably the single most common question I get.
Yeah, because you don't really live like a peasant, and yet you think you're the peasant in the comic. You want to take down the system that you are benefiting more than the average person from. You have the resources to actually do something about it, and yet you don't. So that's the real underlying question here. Why don't you actually do something about the system when you're in a position to do so, rather than just take a frankly passive income to talk nonsense on the internet in basic edited videos?
What can we do? This usually comes in the form of, yeah, capitalism is bad, but what can we as individuals do to make a change? And I'm kind of giving the game away a little bit by using that particular wording, but we'll get to that.
I mean, he's obviously going to say that you don't do it as individuals, you do it as a collective. Well, this guy's clearly the head of a collective. Again, 10,000 members. That is not a small organisation. And yet, what's he actually going to tell his collective to do? Well, basically nothing more than organise. Because you see it from Politics Joe, you see it from Navarra Media. These people head, effectively, collectives. People who will literally do anything they say, effectively, as long as they're still based in the leftist eyes. And all they actually really tell them to do is just these very facile nothing statements. Oh, organise. Oh, join a union. Oh, just be part of the team. By the way, give me a load of money. Like, these guys play the game of capitalism very well by effectively selling the easiest thing you can sell to people, which is letting them hear what they want to hear. And if people want to spend their money on that sort of thing, I mean, fine, I guess, but I'd argue that's my one biggest issue with capitalism and the free market, is that people will, when they have too much money, will just spend it on pointless things. I've done it in the past. I know everyone else has done it in the past. And in a way, it's a thing that can only happen due to capitalism's hyper-successfulness. So I guess any leftists that have stumbled upon this video and managed to get to this far into the video, think on that. Are you putting your money where you should be? Is it worth giving these people money to just bleat points and sentences that you want to hear when, frankly, you could just say them in a mirror?
The original idea for this video was to have a concrete answer I can link people to, because honestly I'm tired of typing out the same answer 30 times every episode.
Again, if this isn't proving that he's a grifter at this point, I don't know what will, so I'll probably drop it now. But if you're being constantly asked as a thought leader, what are we supposed to do about it? And you, as he says on his Patreon, he's been running this channel since 2017. If for 7 years you haven't come up with a decent answer that's actually applicable, then you are just grifting. I mean, this is the difference with me. I complain all the time about the way government works, about councils, things like that. And I give people concrete answers like, well, join a political party that you think will make a difference. Try and push for change at a local level. It's a lot more realistic as a goal. When it comes to the national level, well, there's not an awful lot you can do about it. But if you do make and join a political party that is good enough at the local level, that'll eventually influence to a more national level. A lot of parties at the moment, especially in the UK, are falling at the first hurdle because they're trying to get national before they actually make any sort of grassroots council level strongholds. And I mean, this is part of the reason the Greens were so good. They did that in Brighton. And the reason they're not doing too well on the national level is because on the national level people understand that they're crazy. But you get to a local level and they're actually pretty good at actually locally garnering support. I mean, I know my auntie votes Greens now simply because there are Green people out in the street all the time and knocking on a door all the time, and effectively they just ended up agreeing that Boris Johnson's a bit of a prat, and that's why she now votes Green. And that's how easy it is to get people over to your side, by the way. Policy doesn't really matter, just let them hear what they want to hear. Like Second Thought is doing, except he's doing it for money.
but I do think it's valuable information in its own right. Okay, so what can we do?
This is one of those Fiverr assets, by the way. Again, just on the point that he is apparently overseeing a not too long ago failing business, I wouldn't be shocked if he's actually paying someone an awful lot of money to make these graphic designs, which my own friends are offering to do for me for free, at least to make prototype ones, and then I'm happy to pay them small sums of money if they ever make any more. But this guy's probably overpaying a graphic designer, because if there's one thing I've learned from communists, it's that they were actually not very good at running businesses. They just happen to get so much money that their business pretty much struggles to fail, because again, all these communists are just telling millennials and Zoomers what they want to hear, which is that, oh, it's not your fault that you can't buy a house, it's actually the whole system and the evil old people who want to keep you down. And while I agree the current state of the world is far from perfect, I'm not going to be as silly as to tell people that there's nothing they can do about it. Which, by the way, I wouldn't be shocked if that is what this video says.
How to answer that question? If only there were some book I could refer to with that exact question as the title. The more experienced socialists among you have probably already guessed, we're going to be drawing a bit from Lenin's 1902 work, What is to be Done?
Oh, good lord, this is going to be good. I mean, already, the complete difference in context of 21st century America to earlier 20th century feudal Russia is so completely different, I don't even think it's worth going through, but just to see how crazy this gets, let's listen.
This is the thing that's both frustrating and useful about questions like these. They've pretty much all been answered for the past, 100 years.
Yes, but the problem is that most people don't read, and this is the thing, I understand it. I don't particularly like reading either. I still have a pretty full bookshelf now, via forcing myself to read, but this is why you need to read things, distill it for people, and put them in YouTube videos, like I do, and like you do. And another problem is that when it comes to such a simple question as to what do we do about capitalism, yeah, you're right, it has been answered before. Yes, it has been implemented before. So now you need to start asking, why does it keep winning? And I don't just mean winning for a select few people, though, as I say, the system isn't perfect at the moment because we're not in a free market. I mean, the American context is a little different, but even for the average person, being in America is a hell of a lot better than being in Britain. And I really hate to say that fact, but it's true. I have seen jobs advertised for head of IT that are going for about £30,000 a year. And that is equivalent to some entry-level jobs to be store managers in America. And I know the whole argument for, oh, but what about disposable income after paying for all taxes and all, medical insurance that you need in America? No, they still have way more disposable income. It's just so much more worth moving to New York if you work in London and get another job there, because your salary is probably going to double, while your cost of living, ironically, actually is probably going to come down. Honestly, the people I know that have moved to New York from London, they're doing pretty well for themselves. People move to Australia from Britain, and things like that. And what's the reason for this? Well, you look at the free market index of the UK, it's simply been going down over the past few years, because apparently we've got mad free marketeers in government for the past 14 years. Yeah, give me a break.
It's frustrating because we've all had 100 years to realize that, and read the books and learn from the past, and it's useful because at least the books exist to point to when people ask the same questions they've been asking for the past century.
It sucks so much when the first answer quite a lot of communists give is just, oh, read a book, or read this, that, or the other book, when that's probably the last thing you should be saying. If you are someone like Second Thought, or someone like me, my example, what I tend to do in videos is explain my position, explain what's going on, give what I think the solution is, and then every now and then, if it's relevant, I will bring up a book that I have got my ideas from to supplement your worldview, to supplement your reading list. It's not the first thing I go to, because for most people, you should be able to explain your position to them for them to understand it and realise if they agree or disagree. The reading list is more there for people who either want to know more or don't understand it enough and are interested in knowing more to hopefully help them understand it more. But it actually says quite a thing about the communists if an awful lot of them don't really know that these questions that they're asking have already been answered. Probably because, from all sides, they can actually see that they don't have a solution to what to do under capitalism because they're thriving under it. We don't have the underclass like we had in the earlier 20th century when communism started to boom throughout Europe. We've seen the results of what happens when you have a free market and industrial base that manages to innovate and grow. It does wonders for living standards all over the world, let alone the country it's happening in. And every communist country is either collapsed or the ones that are working have special economic zones where free markets are effectively allowed to blossom, and it allows those countries to make their money and continue with the rest of the economy which they are trying to completely control. And it may be a bit Whig version of history, sure, I mean there's no reason that all this can't collapse, but as I say, communists are having such a bad time actually getting any sort of coherent movement together. The main reason is because their talking heads are benefiting off it too much. You know, as soon as it actually collapses, they're probably going to lose a lot of money, and they're just not incentivized to actually take a question like this seriously. Hence the first thing he says is, let's read what Lenin had to say, when frankly it's not relevant.
As annoying as it can be to have to keep rehashing the same arguments and citing the same resources, it's our responsibility, talking about the more experienced socialists here, it's our responsibility to help educate people who come to us with questions. And this is a big one.
Then why is it taking you 7 years to make this video? Not being funny, but as he says, he gets this question asked all the time and he's not done it for 7 years. And as I say, the reason is because there's not a very good answer that he can give. There is not an answer he can give where he stays rich and actually successfully brings about the socialist revolution. It just can't happen. That's why he's delaying answering the question, as I say, and not really going to answer it here.
The answer to the question, what can we do, is multifaceted. A lot of it will depend on where you live.
Has he actually said anything about Lenin's book that he brought up, or has he just said, oh, there's a book that answers this, and then instantly moved on?
Someone in Russia or Somalia or Indonesia may need to take a different approach than someone in the US, for example. It depends on the material conditions in your country. But there is one thing that has remained constant through all of history and across every single country on Earth, and that's the need to get organized.
Well, I mean, that's one off my bingo card already. Get organised is something that all the socialists and communists say, and all it is a platitude. The only time it's really been successful, I'd say, is in Portland with Antifa there. They are relatively organised. And then when they got their small-scale revolution in Seattle with the Chaz, it lasted a couple of weeks. There were hundreds of sexual assault cases, and the whole place was taken over by a warlord after not very long. And there was absolutely no way they could make it autonomous because of this picture. If you ever wanted to see why you should not be a socialist because it is very cringe, I think this picture speaks 1,000 words for why you should never take them seriously.
This is something that Westerners in particular seem to overlook. And it's not entirely our fault. We've been spoon-fed hyper-individualist propaganda for many, many decades.
I think this is a bit of a cope. All I have heard from socialists throughout my entire lifetime is we all need to get organised. I don't think the issue is that parts of society are very individualistic and do encourage people to, pull themselves up by the bootstraps, better themselves, things like that. I actually think that's not been pushed enough recently. I really don't. I think a big issue at the moment with mental health is that you need other people's help to actually get through it, when I think for a lot of people they could get it through themselves with support rather than have other people be the cure for them when the cure is themselves. But anyway, for years all I've heard from socialists is get organised, join this, that and the other group. And people do it, and I think they quickly realise that nothing actually gets done. And I think that's why a lot of people will go to 1 or 2 meetings and then basically never go again, unless they basically have an easy way up the ladder to actually either get to a position of power and influence or just for the money. Because there's a reason that public unions in the UK have an awful lot more members than unions against private companies do, like supermarkets. Because the union ones do actually hold some political power. They're constantly in talks with the government. Take the trains, for example. There's been strikes for months and months and months and months because they do actually have the power to shut down all of the lines on given days to eventually get the government to concede onto their demands. When it comes to private sector unions, it's not as easy to do that. The most that they can really do is try and sue companies for, say, paying warehouse workers more than shop assistant workers because, it's a gender thing, when in reality it's because, the warehouse work is more valuable because the men in there can do a lot more with the, forklifts and things like that and the logistics than the majority woman job in the shops do. I mean, it is that simple. If the women wanted more money, go work in a warehouse, but they don't want to do that. Anyways, bring me all back to this point. As I say, it's a massive cope that society tells you not to organise, or not to act as collectives. Society tells you to do that all the time. You know, when you're in school, you're constantly put on team sports to cooperate. As I went through school, pretty much every year you would be assessed on group projects in some way. You are constantly, you know, you have the individual assessments, sure. You have a load of group assessments as well, though. We are constantly taught to quote unquote organise and work together. The reason communists struggle to actually do it is because they don't really know what their aims are, because an awful lot of them are very comfortable and are just having a short-term rebellious stage, or long-term in the millennials' case. See a load of problems and just think, well, that's different to what the other side are saying. You know, the other side are saying, oh, we want to keep a lot of the status quo. This one is saying they want a revolution of it. There's a lot of things that I think need revolution, therefore I've joined them. You know, people are lazy with their brains. They don't like to think. And when they see a big problem that has been consistent for, you know, 20 years? No, not 20 years, 16 years now, then yeah, of course, they're going to go along with the stories that they've heard. Oh, we've had austerity, that's not helped. Oh, they've put forward a free market, not even true. So they're just going to go with the opposite of that. But the thing is, when you actually start to get into these socialist groups, I mean, what has actually been put forward here? Oh, read some Lenin. Like, do you go into any more than that? Let's find out.
It stands to reason that we default to thinking there must be some individual course of action we each can take.
I mean, to join a collective, it does take initial individual action. Well, I moved house 9 months ago. I only actually managed to join the church by getting myself there, going to mass and introducing myself to people. Like, yeah, that's an individual action. You know, individual action doesn't need to be this massive revolutionary step. It can be a small thing like that, and some people won't have even taken that step. And as I say, just saying organise doesn't really mean anything to them.
And if you want to look at it that way, sure, each of us can take the individual personal step of joining a socialist organization.
Okay, boom, there you go. That's better than just organise. He's saying organise with a socialist organisation.
But we need to shift our perspective to realize that it's only through the collective power of the organization that we actually have any agency to really change things.
I'm sure he's not going to go into this properly, but even that's only true with the elites of the organisation. The members are basically there to help fund it, and as a kind of hard power for the more elites in the group to, you know, when they're in the negotiating table, say, look, I've got all these people on our supporting side. That can either translate to votes, that can translate to money and influence, or it can literally translate to, as we saw during Black Lives Matter over the course of the 2020 riots, actual direct violence. But obviously an awful lot of people actually join these organisations with the thought process that they are going to be one of the elite, and a lot of them, I think, get a bit disenfranchised when they realise they're just one of the foot soldiers who is effectively there as a cash cow.
For most Americans, the first thing that probably comes to mind when we talk about organizing is labor unions. Unions are an example of collective power. One worker standing up to the boss alone is likely to get fired and replaced. But an entire store? That's a different story.
I mean, we say that, but then what's ended up happening instead is that an awful lot of these workers have literally just been replaced with autonomous robots and procedures. You know, you just get rid of the workers instead if they're causing such a fuss. And that's not an issue. I see that as progress. The problem is that it's being done a bit prematurely. You know, it's not all ready yet. It's not being done by the innovators yet. It's going straight into the mainstream because of all these people that are saying, oh, I want more money. And what's ended up happening to them is, well, they've ended up without a job. So, not necessarily the right way to go about these things, but hey, this is another reason I don't think labour unions are particularly popular. As I say, you rarely actually see them in Britain, and it's probably because the free market is actually typically quite good at equalising these things, but as I say, we don't live in a free market at the moment, so that's why you're seeing wage stagnation quite brutally.
We've seen some incredible growth in labor militancy and strike actions in the US over the last few years. From teachers to doctors to auto workers, people are unionizing and fighting back against the ruling class.
Okay, and what results are they seeing? Because one thing I will point out with all three of those industries, the car industry, the healthcare industry, and the, well, teaching, education industry, is that each one of those are quite well regulated by the government. Overly regulated, some would say. Teachers' unions, obviously, governments basically control most of the state schooling throughout the US. So that's obviously a public sector one. Healthcare, obviously, the big meme is that America, is massively individual only, you know, free market based healthcare. No, you've got big pharma who are constantly lobbying the government to effectively keep their place in that industry, to effectively make a cartel for it. And obviously then that effectively corporatization of big pharma will then, you know, go down to the doctors and how they're paid and things like that. So they'll obviously be striking against that. And then finally, the automobile industry. I mean, America has effectively two well-ingrained automobile companies, Ford and General Motors. They've both been around for probably more than a century at this point. Both have managed to get there via lobbying yet again to be the only ones that can be entrenched there, thereby again not really giving market conditions to any, I mean this, any of these industries that have been used as an example of mass striking. But this is the thing, all of these things that are examples of not capitalism are seen as capitalism by the socialists, because all capitalism really means to socialists is some people are rich. If some people are rich, that means there's capitalism and it needs to be gotten rid of. And that is just an absolutely absurd way to look at the world. But it's effectively all he does. Again, 7 years of reading and doing these videos, and he still couldn't probably give you a good and concise definition of what capitalism actually is. Anyway, protests, carry on.
After all, it's only fair. We're the ones who do the work.
Well, then that begs the question, why don't you make your own business? Why don't you make your own automobile industry, your own doctor's clinic, your own school? Ah, well, you see, we don't have the capital for that. Yes, this is why they make money then, isn't it? Because they put the initial capital into it. They own the damn business. They have massive risks associated with that. They have to have a load of compliance with government, local and federal to comply with. There's actually an awful lot of work that goes into it. Again, I can bring up the stats, but there's no point because pretty much everyone who watches my videos probably knows this already, but CEOs work an average of 80 hours a week. It's no joke. A lot of people get to the position of CEO, can't hack it, and then want to take a more junior position again because they're still making a decent amount of money, but they can't take the pressure, the stress, and they're just probably incompetent at the job too. I can't tell you, as someone who's worked in a supermarket to then become a software developer, I mean, yes, the work is technically less strenuous as a software developer in terms of I'm not carrying heavy things about a shop anymore. However, it is a lot more brain intensive. I tend to work overtime a hell of a lot more. When deadlines are coming up, they mean a hell of a lot more than they did with the shop. It didn't matter if I didn't completely finish putting out all the stock I had for the day because there was someone else coming in to take over for me. You don't have that in a small developer team. Hell, you don't even really have that in a big developer team because you're all given your individual tasks to do. And if you're not making the deadlines, it matters a hell of a lot more. That is why you end up getting paid more for these specialised subjects or in these specialised industries and these specialised jobs, because there aren't as many other people who can take over from you. And that's probably true with teachers, doctors and engineers. And each one of them make above average for the American citizen because they are specialised jobs. And apparently socialism is getting them even more above average.
And while it's amazing to see the victories our unions are winning, it's important to recognize that these victories are still confined to the range of possibilities that exist within capitalism.
So go join a socialist organisation like a labour union. What, is that not the answer then? What are you saying?
You can win better conditions at work, but a labor union under capitalism will never be able to alter the relationship between labor, the people who do the work, and capital, the people who own the means by which that work is done.
There's another part of this argument that I just really detest. There is an awful lot of people out there who work for their own company. You know, an awful lot of garages, if they've not got, you know, Quick Fit on them or something like that, they're usually actually owned by the person doing the work in there. There are literally millions of small companies in America today. And if they're a small company, the person who put the capital in there is probably also a worker and doing an awful lot of things to the business to keep it running. It's a meme of the idea of a board of directors who don't do any work. Like, they do exist, don't get me wrong, but it is very rare that you actually get someone who doesn't work for their company, even though they put the capital into it. And an awful lot of the time, the reason that the person is in a position to not do any work for the company they put their capital into is because they've literally done years of work before that. And they put the extra time in their earlier years so they could get into the position where they didn't have to do anything while their business just ran with managers that they trust. That takes a lot of work. And if one of your main things is that we actually have I don't even know what they mean by a relationship between labour and capital. Like, I don't know what you want there, but under the free market, as keeps getting pointed out, you can make your worker co-ops, you can make your small commune, you can do what you want. That is the whole point. You may get taxed a bit by the state for doing it, but if you're using services of the state, then that's fair enough.
That brings us back to the same question. What do we do?
Oh, great, so don't join a labour union is what I gathered from that. Is the answer just going to be give me money?
According to most Marxists, we also need to focus on building political organizations to work alongside and within labor unions.
Great, so it's organised squared.
Let me read you an excerpt from What is to be Done. Socialism represents the working class, not in its relation to a given group of employers, but in its relation to all classes in modern society, to the state as an organized political force.
Do you think you're really a working class man? Is that really what you think? Do you think you can possibly call yourself working class by making $250,000 a year? Or probably closer to $1/3 a year by just talking to a camera? This is the thing. Not an awful lot of working class people actually want socialism. This is why Margaret Thatcher was so successful. She managed to get the working class of the 70s and give them opportunity to move them up to the middle class. And that's pretty much what happened for an awful lot of people.
Hence, it follows that socialists must not confine themselves entirely to the economic struggle. We must actively take up the political education of the working class, and the development of its political consciousness.
That is so funny. That is effectively saying that we need to tell the plebs what to do. The working class will organise in their own way, but what we need to do is actually herd the sheep. That is effectively what Lenin said there, and oddly enough, that's actually what Lenin did. But for some reason, Second Thought doesn't seem to understand that that is actually quite an offensive thing to say, especially when he's supposed to be the type of person that isn't looking down on the working class.
He goes on to say, the question now arises, what does political education mean? Is it sufficient to confine oneself to the propaganda of working class hostility towards autocracy? Of course not. It is not enough to explain to the workers that they are politically oppressed, any more than it was to explain to them that their interests were antagonistic to the interest of the employers.
I do find it quite funny that this is actually a massive problem that the socialists are having today as well. Like, they're having to explain to people that they're oppressed when these people simply don't feel oppressed. But the problem is that if you do manage to say, oh, all these problems you're having are all actually external, and nothing you can actually do about it unless you join our group, I mean, that's actually a pretty good way to recruit followers, which is probably why socialism is the most popular position these days for millennials and zoomers. So, we'll have fun in the future, I suppose.
Advantage must be taken of every concrete example of this oppression for the purpose of agitation, in the same way as we began to use concrete examples of economic oppression for the purpose of agitation. And inasmuch as political oppression affects all sorts of classes in society, is it not evident that we shall not be fulfilling our task of developing the political consciousness of the workers if we do not undertake the organization of the political exposure of autocracy in all its aspects?
To be fair to Second Thought, he has already mentioned that the context of where you live will mean that you have different routes to this political organisation. But if you've ever heard the term bio-Leninism before, effectively this is what is being explained at the moment. The socialist elites, I guess you can call them, or Leninist elites, effectively need to herd all these people that they can blame their position in life on autocratic oppression on, or any sort of oppression on, and guide them into positions where effectively they will want to enact some sort of revenge or have some sort of revolution, and then get them to use their manpower to actually push through with that. That's effectively how the Bolsheviks took over. Except bio-Leninism is specifically for people who are effectively maladjusted, rather than are just economically working class. That is exactly what has been explained there. And the thing is that Second Thought isn't going to make out that you are going to be one of those maladjusted people who are going to be herded around by one of the elites. He's trying to make out that you join, you will be one of the elites. Because again, to make it clear, the type of people that are paying for this guy to make these videos, and this guy himself, they are effectively just envious mutant freaks. That is effectively what they are. I mean, even this guy has been very successful with this YouTube channel, and could do an awful lot of good with that money, but he chooses not to, because again, he's quite maladjusted. Well-adjusted people try and help out other people. They will be philanthropists. They will try and do something useful with their money. What this guy tries to do is what this guy seems to use his own money for is for effectively vanity more than anything. He used it to get that nice house. That is a nice studio. And honestly, if I were him, I'd be advertising for people to come join his own groups, but he's not used his money to create any, so that money's got to go somewhere, because I do not believe he's investing it properly, unless he's actually hired an accountant, which would be one of the funniest things for an anti-capitalist to do, but here we are. But anyway, point being is that the actual philosophy behind all this doesn't matter. This guy is saying the quiet part out loud, which is that we're all actually envious and we all just want to tear the system down because again, trying to make out that, I mean, maybe it's true for teachers, but the doctors and engineers are the working class type, it's a bit far-fetched. You know, I know people in all three professions. I wouldn't describe any of them as working class.
In order to agitate over concrete examples of oppression, these examples must be exposed. Okay, I think that's fairly clear.
I don't think it is, because I can easily say what Leonard has just said. Effectively, we need to signal to absolutely everyone who is willing to follow us that they should follow us even harder, because we know how to overthrow their oppressors, who aren't even necessarily oppressing them, but we are telling them that they are being oppressed by. However, I would love to hear what Second Thought thinks was just said there.
But to people who may be unfamiliar with some of the jargon, the gist of the text here is that while it's important to agitate within capitalist firms, say getting your local grocery store workers fired up about wage theft, or showing how the boss takes advantage of workers by capping hours just below full time.
Again, these are individual problem type things that can actually be overcome by the individual, simply just by reading your contract. Like, this is what I tell everyone. Read your employment contract. You will avoid an awful lot of hiccups like this. Hell, recently I have just heard of 2 people who managed to make an awful lot of money in the courts simply by reading their contract and taking their employer to court over it. And guess what? It worked out. And it would be a bit of an overcompensation for them to end up in a collective union force to, I don't know, try and up their wages per week. I mean, that wasn't even the issue, by the way, but if an employer isn't paying you properly, yeah, guess what? You can go to court over that. Oh, is an employer capping your hours? Well, that depends on your contract. Are they able to do that? Well, then you should have read the contract and either refuse the job, or while you're at the job, because you're not working full-time, you have time to look for another that won't cap your hours and let you have more money. Of course, another issue in the way of all this as well is simply the fact that legislation is in the way. Why should the company benefit from not giving you full time? They're clearly incentivized to do that. Maybe just take that incentive away. I don't know, tax every employee the same way, or whatever the problem is, no matter their hours. Like, tax them per hour instead of are they full or part time. But no, let's just take and overthrow the system instead, because saying that will get me more money.
It's equally, if not more important, to help them develop a political understanding of how capitalism as a whole creates all the problems they face both at work and in society at large.
See, this is the other issue with the peasant comic. This isn't changing society somewhat. This is completely overthrowing the damn thing and trying to make it completely different for everyone. That's not changing it somewhat. And so this is another problem that I've always had with the comic. Yet you participate in society, right? Everyone participates in society and everyone wants to change it in some way. The problem is that you're not saying, I want to change society somewhat. You're saying, I want to completely overthrow society. I hate it so much that I think it's the worst thing to happen to mankind and it needs to completely change. And yet when you participate in it, it's not just participating, it is being one of the biggest beneficiaries of it ever. So yeah, as I say, absolutely no sympathy for this position. But to credit to him, I suppose all he has done is reworded the sentence. We need to tell these people that they're being oppressed and explain to them how they're being oppressed. When in 99% of cases, if people are genuinely oppressed, they actually do understand why.
How the police protect the interests of capital.
Yeah, if people realise that pretty much everyone owns McDonald's, I think they'd actually be on board with that. People's capital is pretty much everywhere thanks to taxes and their pension schemes. But a lot of people don't really understand that because all they know is, I put money into this, money go up.
How the profit motive leads to crumbling infrastructure, which leads to train derailments that poison entire towns.
I mean, even this is really bad statistics. The number of train derailments actually peaked in the 1970s. Guess what happened in the 1980s? Reagan came in and deregulated the railways. And, oh, guess what happened there? A lot more money went into it. What happens then? Oh, look, we pretty much flatlined the number of train derailments. I mean, the reason that it's in the thousands is because America has the biggest railway network in the world. Basically, apparently what's happened is that when private companies are incentivized to invest in the railway, they actually tend to do it quite well. And yeah, you have freak accidents now and then. I mean, they happen under socialism as well. My god, what's your next example gonna be?
It's all well and good to expose the evils of the boss, but we also need to expose why the boss acts the way he does.
Incentives, I'm not gonna lie, most of the time, it's incentives via government regulation. And again, the boss 90% of the time is working for the company as well. There are very, very few people in the world who are literally just making their money off investments or their business just chugging away. And again, most of the time, that is done via people making that business themselves. Over 90% of millionaires are self-made.
His actions are informed by the capitalist system.
Well, to give him a bit of slack, that is pretty much what I said.
If we get rid of capitalism, the antagonism between boss and worker goes away.
Again, I don't understand this antagonism. Again, these people get really annoyed at me. I have been a worker for some years now, some 10 years now. And in no job of the multiple jobs I've had have I felt that there is animosity between myself and whoever my boss happens to be, whether it's my manager or my boss. And if I have had an issue with the way I've been treated, the worst job I had was in a big corporation, I just left it. I didn't like it. I got another job instead. I don't understand why it's so difficult for people to do that.
Okay, so you may have noticed the words agitation, propaganda, and exposure in that passage. What do these terms mean in a political setting?
Most of them are obvious, and if he says things that are remarkably obvious, I'm just going to skip it. Yeah, they're all pretty self-explanatory, so I'm just skipping that. Here's some more Lenin for you.
Everyone knows that the spread and consolidation of the economic struggle of the Russian workers proceeded simultaneously with the creation of literature exposing economic conditions, i.e. factory and industrial conditions. These leaflets were devoted mainly to exposure of factory conditions, and very soon a passion for exposures was roused among the workers. As soon as the workers realized that the socialist circles desired to and could supply them with a new kind of leaflet that told the whole truth about their poverty-stricken lives, about their excessive toil and their lack of rights, correspondence began to pour in from the factories and workshops.
So that's a really, really badly written couple of paragraphs. But from what I understand, Lenin is saying that effectively factories were handing out leaflets explaining that your poor economic conditions can be improved by joining us to work at the factory where we will give you a wage. But obviously the factory workers pretty quickly realised that if they had their own printing press, they could say to other people, actually, these conditions aren't quite what you would actually like, and it's probably not worth the money, so here we're letting you know about that. And again, you've got to realise, Russia kind of went straight from feudalism and tried to have an industrial revolution under feudalism, so there is a reason that Bolsheviks were very popular there. It's basically because these factory workers, didn't have the same rights that they would have in, say, England or America, where you weren't effectively just a serf to a lord.
This exposure literature created a tremendous sensation, not only in the particular factory exposed in the given leaflet, but in all the factories to which news of the revealed facts spread. And since the poverty and want among the workers in the various enterprises and in the various trades are much the same, the truth about the life of the workers stirred everyone. Even among the most backward workers, a veritable passion arose to get into print. A noble passion for this rudimentary form of war against the whole of the present social system, which is based upon robbery and oppression.
Basically what Lenin is saying is that if people feel oppressed and feel like they can actually get their voice out there, then they will do what they can to try and help get their voice put out there. And, absolutely everyone can do that because everyone has a Twitter account these days. But the problem is that because everyone's information is quite easily out there these days, it's also quite easy to see when people are lying about being as oppressed as a Russian serf. So I'd like to see where he's going with this. Anyway, there's more explanation as to how factory owners would instantly react to pamphlets about their or other people's factory conditions being horrendous, cause them to effectively concede to some of the workers' demands who are striking. And Lenin points out that this effectively has to be done in every facet of life for socialism to overtake capitalism, because, it's a whole system. And therefore this type of tactic needs to be done for just more than economic conditions. I skipped the whole next couple of paragraphs because it was just a long-winded way of saying that.
Okay, that was a long way of saying sharing information about capitalism in the workplace is effective, spooks the ruling class, and helps build a strike movement and favorability of socialism.
Okay, but as you say, this has happened many times in the past. I suppose this is a thing that we're having trouble with today. Obviously, strike action worked pretty well in pretty much every country, let's be fair, in the early 20th century, possibly mid-20th century, I don't think as well. But then this is where the problem came in, and this is why we ended up with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. The unions got a bit too powerful for their own boots. They managed to actually get to their endpoint, which was better working conditions for the workers, better salaries, things like that, and then they ended up just taking over the whole damn thing a bit too well, and kept trying to keep industries alive that frankly should have died. Best example is obviously the coal mining industry here in Britain. And so when their demands go from, look, we just want a life that hasn't left us in squalor and allows us to actually get out of poverty, a lot of people think, yeah, fair enough, they're working, they probably shouldn't be in poverty. However, when they're all clearly getting out of poverty and are now saying, effectively, we want to take over the whole damn system and you need to get out of here, which is effectively what the miners were trying to do in the 70s. Then you get a Margaret Thatcher in because the rest of the people have had it enough and had enough of their goodwill to give you, and therefore you end up absolutely being crushed by Thatcher and Reagan. And so how do you actually overcome this? How do you get people to be agitated by your propaganda when people can effectively see right through it and when your demands become crazy? Because again, this guy is saying that my life isn't good enough despite being a millionaire.
The same is true today. We may not make use of physical pamphlets quite as much, but a business card with a QR code serves the same purpose.
Or, posting videos on Twitter.
The simple act of exposing the ills of the capitalist labor landscape is often enough to start the snowball down the hill. Once that process has begun, it's critical to work within socialist organizations to pursue the political education of the working class.
Right, so there's another level to this at least. You don't just organise, you also agitate by putting out propaganda. And yeah, this is the problem. The propaganda isn't very good. Nobody believes that you are dying from your working conditions at work. This isn't China.
When new socialists or just normal people say things like, we all know this bad stuff is happening, but no one does anything about it.
Yeah, 90% of the time it's a lie.
That's a reflection not on the average worker, but on the people who have the time and political understanding to engage in political agitation and fail to do so. Here's Lenin on the subject.
Oh, for the love of God, I'll listen to it and summarise, but secondly, this is supposed to be the guy with the political education to help agitate. What is he doing? What is he doing with it? He's got millions of pounds. Sorry, he's got millions of dollars, he's American. He's got millions of dollars. Why is he not doing this massive political agitation campaign? Why is all he doing still making goddamn YouTube videos that clearly aren't causing the political agitation? Oh, because he just wants the money. That's what it gets him. It gets him free money. Anyway, the Lenin section is effectively Lenin saying, oh, you might see other people and yourself asking, why is it that these people are all putting up with the oppression, with the police oppressing them or whatever? And he effectively says it's because we're not herding the sheep well enough. we're letting them be this unorganised mess when it should be us with the political knowledge to guide them correctly into actually being effective agitators. That is what Lenin says in the passage that I'm not putting you through, because the way old books are written are very annoyingly worded, and especially when they're translated.
How's it feel to be called out from 120 years in the past? What Lenin's talking about here is something we really struggle with today. We assume someone else is going to do the work.
Yeah, and as I say, what are you actually doing that is forwarding this? All you're doing is making YouTube videos, but Lenin absolutely says here that you need to do a little more than just make the pamphlets. Like, this is Lenin talking after you've made the pamphlets as the political ringleaders, and now you need to get your hands dirty with them and say, look, here I am, follow me, let's, pick the right targets, let's rise up against these policemen or whatever. And instead, they're having done the pamphlets, having made their tweets effectively and thought, yeah, that's job done. And Second Thought's right in the same place, but for some reason thinks he's separate to this issue.
Someone else can organize the masses, unite the various unions, provide political education. We'll show our support when it's convenient. That's not how this works. There's no single savior. We're all responsible. All of us who are aware of the evils of capitalism. We all have to do the work. To get organized, join a socialist organization, and do the work ourselves, not as atomized individuals, but as a united front of socialists and workers.
Yep, that's pretty much what Lenin said. I'll give you that. But you know what? I think I need to play a clip that I cut out from the beginning of this video.
The Discord has been a blast with all the new members. In my opinion, it's the best, most wholesome political server around. If you're interested in helping make this channel completely viewer-funded, consider becoming a patron. Every patron, regardless of pledge amount, gets early access to every video, plus access to the Discord. We've got everything from a book club, to live Q&As with me, to educators ready to answer any questions you may have about socialism.
I mean, how is that helping people organise? You're doing what Lenin has a problem with. You're throwing out the pamphlets and then doing nothing else. You're telling other people to do the work. It's so funny. I don't think... Lenin does kind of imply that it does need to be great men of history that actually, you know, push the vanguard forward, so to speak. I mean, in a way, thank God for the dork right, because I understand this point better than the actual communists do, better than the Leninists do. Effectively, what this whole video is saying is organised. That is all it's saying. But then it's actually missing Lenin's rather large point, which is that actually, second thought, it's you that kind of needs to stop making these videos at this point. Actually get involved with labour unions in your area, which I'm assuming is California, and then bring them together and actually, you know, take over whichever political arms that you think are corrupt. Is he doing that? No. He's having a load of people come to him to ask questions and get book recommendations, and that's pretty much it. I mean, in a way, thank God communists are this goddamn useless, but he's not really addressing the capitalism point at all, is he? I want to improve society somewhat by, checks notes, giving out book recommendations to people and answering basic questions about socialism. Amazing.
And a related issue we struggle with is that many of us put too much faith in spontaneous movements, assuming that once things get bad enough, a critical mass of people will rise up and fix everything in one glorious social movement.
I mean, those types of things do tend to happen. For instance, after the Black Death wiped out a third of Europe, what happened in England specifically was that you had a little peasants' revolt in which an awful lot of peasants were actually quite agitated because they were being paid the same wage despite the fact that they all had to do more work because a third of them had all died. And so obviously in these peasants' revolts you had only a few names that were leaders. You know, while we still have this whole idea of, or socialists I should say, have this idea of, oh, collective action gets us places, it's like, yeah, it does, but it's collective action that actually does have a bit of a shepherd to get everyone to Westminster to challenge Richard II. This, of course, after said shepherd tells the people trying to collect taxes that their taxes have already been paid, when, let's be fair, they probably hadn't, and then just kills the tax collectors. Again, these are all come from the orders of someone, as the Peasants' Revolt is actually quite an interesting one, because it is one where the peasants actually did revolt, because they had little more to lose after the Black Death and the poll tax was introduced, but you got to bear in mind after that, effectively feudalism still lasts another 200 to 300 years after that, so their working conditions by comparison can't have been that bad. And that's not even a revolt against capitalism, by the way, despite the left wing trying to take it as one of their examples of the left wing cause winning. Again, it was more an anti-tax revolt than it was a revolt against monarchy or capitalism, which didn't exist at the time anyway.
That's not how this works either. Think about the Black Lives Matter movement. We had a whole summer where huge numbers of people were protesting across the country. We got a street named after the movement, and the Democrats put on a little show. No material change came of this massive uprising because it wasn't politically organized. It didn't really even have concrete demands.
Yeah, because the left at this point are just a bunch of grifters. Like, that's all they are. What happened to the people who were organising Black Lives Matter? They all became millionaires and bought mansions. Hell, the Black Lives Matter movement that happened in Bristol in Britain, they took down an entire statue that is still down and graffitied, by the way, still not gone back up on the plinth. And the person who organised that ended up, I think they extorted £70,000 and have ended up with a suspended sentence. And because they spaffed all the money and don't have any money anymore, they actually couldn't fine her. They had to fine her £1 and say, look, she pays this £1 now, and then we can get the other £70,000 she extorted in the future should she ever come into assets via a business or a inheritance or something like that. But this is the thing, Black Lives Matter was just full of grifters. And he says it's full of righteous anger. No, it's not full of righteous anger. As I say, this is all just for show. All this political ideology, it's window dressing. all the incentive is here for the political left in the modern world, leftists I should say, not every left-winger. It all comes down to envy. A lot of these people were envious. A lot of these people felt like they were in a position that they didn't necessarily deserve, because they are completely force-fed propaganda that says, you know, effectively the economy is a zero-sum game. Because someone like, say, Donald Trump is racist and rich, that means that he stole from you. And it's just not the case, but they hear that, they start getting agitated, they don't face the proper consequences for rioting in 2020, and, well, look what happens. Some nice things are done in their name, and that's it. There's no actual change, because, as he said, yes, there was no organisation, but there can't be organisation because the whole thing is just done by greedy, envious people who don't really care about collective action and just want to become millionaires, as you have become, by the way, second thought. Just thought I'd mention that.
There was plenty of righteous anger, which is good, but without a way to channel that into forcing specific change, it was always destined to be co-opted or fizzle out.
I mean, the thing is as well, is that I've done a video on this. There were specific demands by Black Lives Matter, it's just that they were all crazy. It was basically give black people millions of dollars and defund the police. And these certain areas that actually try to do something like that realise that that is basically just unworkable, and absolutely no one had the appetite for it anyway, apart from the few black elites that would become millionaires out of it. It was absolutely pointless. So that's another reason it fizzled out. Was it? Yes, it was effectively just a load of people having an emotional tantrum, and then the people trying to organise it were effectively greedy idiots. And it worked out for some of them.
Here's Lenin on the subject of spontaneity.
Lenin basically says the same thing that I've just said, that yes, these spontaneous strikes in Russia in the late 19th century basically came about because people were having big tantrums because they felt oppressed. And as I say, they probably were actually oppressed. And he says the problem is that this is the embryonic form of political revolution, and what we need to do is actually, you know, be the guiding hand yet again. Rather than just let them destroy machinery in an unorganised way, let's target the bigger factories. I mean, it doesn't say this, but this is implied. Let's guide them to target the bigger factories and the bigger political figures, so that we're effectively taking the problem to their door and that they affect change, and the people that are under them or are a lower status than them, which in those days did effectively just mean they have less money than them, will also change as well. And again, my issue with Leninism isn't that it doesn't work. I think it does work. I think my problem with Leninism is that it necessitates lying to people to get their way. And if it also necessitates violence to get their way. And I think violence really in the modern world is a last resort. And I don't think we're anywhere near the point of needing political violence. And so if the basis of your movement is to lie to people and then guide them toward violent acts, I don't see that as a legitimate tactic. It's a completely illegitimate one. It's my problem with it. And this guy, the whole time, second thought, will say, oh, no, it's not for political violence. It's just agitation. You know, it's direct action. All that ever means is rioting. That's all it ever means. And so, no, I reject that this is an acceptable way to play the political game.
I'm sure you've heard the expression, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. This struggle against capitalism is about as clear an example as it gets. Large, righteous, and disorganized uprisings failed because of a lack of political vision. But the seed of understanding was there.
Yeah, man, that's why they were torching Wendy's. Again, it makes me laugh that you know, Black Lives Matter was trying to fight against the police, which are there to protect capital interests, when it's like, well, of course they are. We live in a paradigm. We live throughout history. It has been a case of we need to protect property rights. I mean, obviously the problem with feudalism was that it was only the landed gentry that had any property rights. Your average serf could only have a house at behest of the lord. They didn't really have any proper freedom. Whereas these days it's quite the opposite. People are given social housing, and then that's protected by the police. And again, everyone basically owns McDonald's because it's a publicly traded company. Everyone probably owned that Wendy's to some degree, and yet it got burned down. And hell, there are probably black people who work there as well. How's it helping their economic situation? The answer, it isn't. But this is the thing, it's all a fairy tale in socialist head. You know? It was evil capitalists that caused people like George Floyd to die, despite the fact that George Floyd's death had nothing to do with any rich person. He was trying to pass off a counterfeit note and then ingested a load of fentanyl so that the police couldn't put him in prison again because he was already a criminal. I mean, honestly, the amount of newspaper obituaries I saw that were trying to make him out to be some sort of saint was absolutely ridiculous. The only reason he managed to get a massive funeral with horse-drawn carriages was because, again, this was just an embezzlement fund. You know, oh, give money for George Floyd. Why? Why should I do that, socialists? Oh, because he's black. And that's all it comes down to. That's all it comes down to with these socialists. When they say, what do we do in a capitalist system? Give me money. That's all it is. How has any of this window dressing been useful for people? What have people learned from this? Join a labour union, herd the sheep. But then they don't understand that it's saying herd the sheep. Because this man is saying there doesn't need to be a shepherd. You'll all just know the way to go collectively. And not even Lenin believed that.
When people ask, what can we do? This is the answer. Join organizations that are working towards building the political program necessary to unite the working class under a single banner.
See what I mean? All that they would have to end up doing is organise. That's what every socialist organisation is trying to do. The problem is that they can never agree on what the aims of socialism should be. You've got socialists that hate Black Lives Matter because they know that it's an embezzlement fund. You've got socialists that hate white people because of intersectionality. You've got socialists that hate families because their dad wouldn't buy them a PS4 when they were 6 years old. There is so much disagreement that it's never going to happen, so he may as well have just said organise, because again, he's asked for a utopia. Not even the Bolsheviks could get all the socialists on side. That's why they ended up killing half of them. It is absolutely unbelievable. Capitalism sucks, what do we do? Give me money. That's all he may as well have said.
There is nothing we can do alone against the oppressive capitalist regimes of the world. The only thing that has ever worked in the past is the only thing that will work today. Mass mobilization and political organization.
Yeah, well, I suppose this is why economic Leninism turned to bio-Leninism, because the economic side just wasn't working. I mean, as much as he wants this to be all about economics, no, the economy is not the way to go for socialists anymore, and it hasn't been for quite a while. Because the things you complain about, you know, wage theft and capping hours, it's really nothing compared to what the Bolsheviks managed to get their mass of people from, which was genuine peasants who had nothing to lose. The problem you have these days is that even the socialists who don't feel like they have that much money still feel like they have their freedom to lose. Which, yeah, we have nothing to lose but our chains. They don't really believe that. They know they have freedom, and that's why the most they do is riots when there's a mass riot going on, because they think they can get away with it because there's a kind of they can't arrest us all mentality. And it turns out that's actually quite true as well. You know, in Britain, there was one riot, one riot in 2011. And then over the Black Lives Matter period, you had a few protests with a few broken windows and one statue torn down. And that was pretty much it. You don't really see that anymore. You see Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil with their mass movements, and they're all getting arrested to the point where you don't even really see that anymore. You see one or two highways that are being blocked, and even then, you're just not seeing it anymore. As I say, you might see it a bit over summer, now that the weather's a bit clearer and, you know, the students are out of uni. But that's it. There was no mass movement in Britain. There hasn't been for quite a while. Compared to America, we're actually doing pretty well.
That's why the expression agitate, educate, organize is so common in socialist circles. That's the formula.
Oh, my goodness, and then what happens? Oh... People like, you second thought, get the money.
I'm going to leave some resources in the description, as well as links to all the main US socialist organizations. They all have their pros and cons, they all have their problems, and God knows they all hate each other. We socialists are really good at not getting along. I've personally worked with CPUSA and DSA, but join whatever is available in your area, even if you don't agree with them on everything.
I absolutely love it. He just completely pulled the rug out from under himself from what he just said. Oh, what's the answer to this whole thing that I've just put you through? Oh, you need to join an organisation that has a route to power that will actually bring all the different socialist movements together under one banner so that we actually have a large-scale mass movement to actually affect political change. And he says, oh, no, don't, just forget all that. You know, here's a bunch of links to a bunch of different socialist organisations that all hate each other and never going to get that. So what the hell? What the hell? Oh, just join an organisation, it doesn't matter. No, it clearly does, because Lenin says that it kind of matters, because if you've got a whole load of people who are disorganised, which, if you've just got a load of organisations that hate each other and want different things, that is not being organised. You've just managed to atomize these different organizations into individuals. You've basically made the atomizing individuals slightly bigger. And then you've said, oh, it doesn't matter if you don't agree with them on everything, join them anyway. You're like, yeah, sure, but why can't they do that at the organization level? For God's sake. And also, he just completely outsourced the organization, by the way. He said, again, oh, join an organization where we're going to bring them all together under one banner. He's not even trying to do that himself. And I'm sure he's part of some of these organizations, I don't know. But the fact he's not telling us, he could say, oh, I'm part of this organization. If you're in my area, please join. He may say that in a minute, but he doesn't even mention that in the first place. He front loads it with, here's a load of political organizations, just join one, doesn't really matter. He's just made a whole video explaining why it does matter, for God's sake. As I say, it's all window dressing. This guy is an envious freak. All he wants is your money. If you are one of the 10,000 people giving him money, I suggest you stop right now. This man is not helpful to you or anyone else. He has literally just been hypocritical to his own goddamn position. And I'm not just talking about living in capitalism, by the way. I'm talking about his plan to join an organisation to make a mass movement to revolutionise the entire system. He is not doing that at all.
It is way more valuable to get involved and start working with other socialists towards a brighter future than it is to criticize from the sidelines.
He just did that. That's exactly what you just did. Join an organisation, none of them are perfect. In fact, they all hate each other and can't make this mass movement. But still, go join it anyway, because it's better than just having a go at them from the sidelines, despite the fact that's exactly what I just did. As I say, I don't know if he's part of any organisation, but I don't know why you wouldn't mention which ones he's a part of. Anyway, he does a thank you for watching and then amazingly says this.
I've also got a Discord server for my patrons where we do an actual book club, and I try to do a live Q&A every month. So if you appreciate my work, consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help keep this operation afloat. Go get organized, and I'll see you next time.
I found it amazing how this man, again, he said the business was struggling a few months ago, and then he got a surge in people joining the Discord via giving him money. But he tries to do a live Q&A once a month. How difficult is it to do a live Q&A once a month? You make one video a week. Look, from my perspective, I'm on 2 streams at a minimum a week. Sometimes I do a third. At times I've even done 4 a week. I try and make 3 videos a week. And yes, not as much effort goes into each video, but I'd say probably the same amount of effort goes into make his 1 video a week than my 3 videos a week. And even then, he outsources some of the work to his editor, clearly, and to his graphic designer, clearly. So what the hell are you doing where you can't even manage to give a live Q&A to people who are making you a millionaire, by the way, once a month? Like, that is just crazy to me. Like, yeah, sure, I've not been able to make Laughing at the Guardian every week I should be able to, but guess what? I add in extras then, if that's the case that I need to do it. I just can't believe how lazy this YouTuber is. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a lazy YouTuber. I'm not saying that I'm not. I am saying I don't make enough money to justify not being lazy, though. This guy makes millions, literally millions, and can only try and do his monthly Q&A promises to the people who are giving him money. I mean, as I say, it's just crazy. It's just crazy that that is his mindset. Anyway, I am kind of glad I went through that video, because I've covered an awful lot of topics there, and I feel like I have to go through these every now and then. Again, this guy is nearly 2 million subscribers. He gets hundreds of thousands of views. This is how people are genuinely viewing the world, and they are becoming more socialist, and obviously I need to be some sort of voice against that. Otherwise, we're going to keep seeing this issue of millennials and zoomers going even more and more left, which is not what we want, because what we've seen is the political forces going more and more and more left-wing, and nothing being done about it. And one day we're going to be the ones in charge, so the less socialists we have in that cohort, the better. Anyway, that is everything I had for you today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.